Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are in Emerson's journal collection number 26, which dates from 1835. We are up to April 16th of that year. As a quick reference, Emerson is already living in Concord, and he is 31 years old. He will turn 32 in May. And with that said, I'll go ahead and get started. April 16th. This quote unquote snow in summer, which falls so fast today, is like a wound from a friend. Dr. Ripley calls it robin snow. Why must always the philosopher mince his words and fatigue us with the explanation? He speaks from the reason, and being, of course, contradicted word for word by the understanding, he stops like a cogwheel at every notch to explain. Let him say, I idealize, and let that be once for all, or I sensualize, and then the rationalist may stop his ears. Empedocles said bravely, I am God, I am immortal, I condemn human affairs. And all men hated him. Yet every one of the same men had his religious hour when he said the same thing. Fable avoids the difficulty, is at once exoteric and esoteric, and is clapped by both sides. Plato and Jesus used it, and history is such a fable. Plato had a secret doctrine, had he? What secret can he conceal from the eyes of Montaigne, of Bacon, of Kant? Let the imaginative man deny himself and stick by facts. As a man must not bring his children into company naked, and must not bring more children into the world than he can clothe, so the idealist must retain his thoughts until they embody themselves in fit outward illustrations. A courthouse is a good place to learn the limits of man. The best counsel are not orators, but very slovenly speakers. To use Mr. Warren's fine apology for Bailey's, they spread their ability over the whole argument and have not strong points. The interminable sentences of Mr. H., claws growing out of claws, like the prickly ear, as Charles said, reminded me of nothing so much as certain vestry predilections, but in the courthouse the worth of a man is gauged. An advantage shines on the abolition side, that these philanthropists really feel no clog, no check from authority, no discord, no sore place in their own body which they must keep out of sight or tenderly touch. People just out of the village, or the shop, reason and plead like practiced orators, such scope and subject gives them, and such stimulus to their affections. The reason is glad to find a question which is not, like religion or politics, bound around with so many traditions and usages that every man is forced to argue unfairly, but one on which he may exhaust his whole love of truth, his heart and his mind. This is one of those causes which will make a man. Never is a good cause in facts long at loss for an ideal equipment. It was alarming to see the lines of sloth in so many faces in the courthouse. The flame of life burns very dim. The most active lives have so much routine as to preclude progressives almost equally with the most inactive. And then there is a French quotation by Rousseau, which he speaks to Diderot, but it's not translated. April 19th. It is a happy talent to know how to play. Some men must always work if they would be respectable. For the moment they trifle, they are silly. Others show most talent when they trifle. Be it said of W. that his excess of reverence made it impossible for him to realize ever that he was a man. He never assumed equality with strangers, but still esteemed them older than himself, though they were of his own age or younger. He went through life postponing his maturity and died in his error. April 22nd. I have made no record of Everett's fine eulogy at Lexington on the 20th, but he is all art, and I find in him nowadays maugre all his gifts, and great merits more to blame than praise. He is not content to be Edward Everett, but would be Daniel Webster. This is his mortal distemper. Why should such a genius waste itself? Have we any to spare? Daniel Webster, nature's own child, sat there all day and drew all eyes. Poor Everett! For this was it that you left your own work, your exceeding great and peculiar vocation, the desire of all eyes, the gratitude of all ingenious scholars, to stray away hither and mimic this man, that here and everywhere in your best and for work unsurpassed exertions you might still be mere secondary and satellite to him, and for him hold a candle? Webster spoke at the table few and simple words, but from the old immovable basis of simplicity and common natural emotion to which he instinctively and consciously adheres. Quote, "We only row, we're steered by fate." The involuntary education is all. See how we are mastered. With the desire of dogmatizing, here we sit chatting. With desire of poetic reputation, we still prose. We would be teachers, but in spite of us we are kept out of the pulpit and thrust into the pew. Who doth it? No man. Only lathe, only time, only negatives, indisposition, delay, nothing. On the same auspicious morning I received a letter from Carlyle the wise, the brave, and his intimations of a visit to America, which purpose may God prosper and consummate. Better a great deal have friends full grown before they are made acquainted, like Moody and Webster. They have the pleasant surprise of the bare result. A man meets a man. What fact is more valuable than the difference of our power alone with the others? April 23rd. The order of things consents to virtue. Such scenes as luxurious poets and novelists often paint, where temptation has a quite overcoming force, never or very rarely occur in real life. It is very hard to know what to do if you have great desires for benefiting mankind, but a very plain thing is your duty. It may be suspected, then, that the depth of wisdom and the height of glory is there. Self-union, never risk that. Neither lie, nor steal, nor betray, for you violate consciousness. Nothing is self-evident but the commandments of consciousness. Quote, "The limbs of my buried ones," etc. I dislike the bad taste of almost everything I have read of Jean Paul. This scrap, for instance, Shakespeare never said these hard artificial things. We think we are approaching a star. I fear it is a nebula. At least individual aims are very nebulous. May 1st. Cloudy and cold. Is not May morning sure to be? May 9th. Spin out your web to the end of your yarn. 10 river streams from your finger ends. A frost this morn. If what you have read in newspapers you had read in good books, how much would you know? May 11th. A foolish German fairy tale, The Short Mantle, which I read in English long years ago, made my cheeks glow again, and almost the gracious drops fall at the triumph of the chaste and gentle gentleness. Very docile we are to such pretty tales, but to verify them in our own chaste life and simple spiritual excellence, very slow indeed. It is a fine flattery to tell your friend he is a singular mind and an incalculable person. I am disqualified by hearing this strife concerning Goethe from judging truly of his genius. He is that which the intelligent hermit supposes him to be, and can neither be talked up nor talked down. We are all wise for other people, none for himself. That wise Fessenden told me never to have two related ideas without putting them on paper. Genius seems to consist merely in trueness of sight, in using such words as show that the man was an eyewitness and not a repeater of what was told. Thus the girl who said, "The earth was a aiguille." Lord Bacon, when he speaks of exploding gunpowder as a fiery wind blowing with that expansive force, etc., these are poets. Hard times in this contradictory world of truth, the hard times come when the good times are in the world of commerce, namely sleep, full eating, plenty of money, care of it, and leisure. These are the hard times. Nothing is doing, and we lose every day. The young preacher is discouraged by learning the motives that brought his great congregation to church. Scarcely 10 came to hear his sermon, but singing or a new pelisse or cousin William, or the Sunday school or a proprietors' meeting after church, or the merest anility in Hanover Street were the beetles that brought in the bolts that hold his silent assembly in the church. Never mind how they came, my friend. Never mind who or what brought them, any more than you do who or what set you down in Boston in 1835. Here they are, real men and women, fools, I grant, but potentially divine, every one of them convertible. Every ear is yours to gain. Every heart will be glad and proud and thankful for a master. There where you are, serve them and they must serve you. They care nothing for you, but to be them a Plato. Be to them a Christ, and they shall all be Platos and all be Christs. May 13th. Do I believe so far in your doctrine of compensation as to trust that greatness cannot be cheaply procured? Self-denial and persisting self-respect can alone secure the proper fruits. Act naturally, act from within, not once or twice, but from month to month, without misgiving, without deviation, from year to year, and you shall reap the costly advantages of moral accomplishments. Make haste to reconcile you to yourself, and the whole world shall leap and run to be of your opinion. Imprison that stammering tongue within its white fence until you have a necessary sentiment or a useful fact to utter, and that said, be dumb again. Then your words will weigh something, 2 tons like St. John's. What a benefit if a rule could be easily given whereby the mind could at any moment east itself and find the sun. But long after we have thought we were recovered and sane, light breaks in upon us, and we find we have yet had no sane moment. Another morn rises on mid-noon. Who is capable of a manly friendship? Very few. Charles thinks he can count 5 persons of character, and that Shakespeare and the other writers of the first class infused their character into their works, and hence their rank. We feel an interest in a robust, helpful mind, in Alfred, Chaucer, Dante, which Goethe never inspires. The truest state of mind rested in becomes false. Thought is the manna which cannot be stored. It will be sour if kept, and tomorrow must be gathered anew. Perpetually must we east ourselves, or we get into irrevocable error, starting from the plainest truth, and keeping as we think the straightest road of logic. It is by magnifying God that men become pantheists. It is by piously personifying him that they become idolaters. As the world signified the Greek beauty, so skepticism, alas, signifies sight. Not in his goals, but in his transition, man is great. See the second aphorism of the Novum Organum, that neither hand nor the mind of man can accomplish much without tools, etc., etc. And then there's a series of Latin words without translation. This is the defense of written or premeditated preaching, of the written book, of the composed poem. No human wit unaided is equal to the production at one time of such a result as Hamlet or Lear, but by a multitude of trials and 1,000 rejections and using and perusing of what was already written, one of those tragedies is at last completed, a poem made that shall thrill the world by the mere juxtaposition and interaction of lines and sentences that singly would have been of little worth in short date. Rightly is this art named composition, and the composition has manifold the effect of the component parts. The orator is nowise equal to the evoking on a new subject of this brilliant chain of sentiments, facts, illustrations, whereby he now fires himself and you. Every link in this living chain he found separate. One 10 years ago, one last week. Some of them he found in his father's house, or at school when a boy. Some of them by his losses, some of them by his sickness, some by his sin. The Webster with whom you talk admires the oration almost as much as you do, and knows himself to be nowise equal, unarmed, that is, without his tool of synthesis, to the splendid effect which he is yet well pleased you should impute to him. No hands could make a watch. The hands brought dry sticks together and struck the flint with iron, or rubbed sticks for fire, and melted the ore, and with stones made crowbar and hammer. These again helped to make chisel and file, rasp and saw, piston and boiler, and so the watch and the steam engine are made, which the hands could never have produced. And these again are new tools to make still more recondite and prolific instruments. So do the collated thoughts beget more, and the artificially combined individuals have in addition to their own a quite new collective power. The main is made up of many islands, the state of many men, the poem of many thoughts, each of which, in its turn, filled the whole sky of the poet, was day and being to him. May 14th. There is hardly a surer way to incur the censure of infidelity and irreligion than sincere faith and an entire devotion. For to the common eye, pews, vestries, family prayers, sanctimonious looks and words constitute religion, which the devout man would find hindrances. And so we go, trying always to weld the finite and infinite, the absolute and the seeming together. On the contrary, the manner in which religion is most positively affirmed by men of the world is barefaced skepticism. When I write a book on spiritual things, I think I will advertise the reader that I am very a wicked man, and that consistency is nowise to be expected of me. When will you mend Montaigne? When will you take the hint of nature? Where are your essays? Can you not express your one conviction that moral laws hold? Have you not thoughts and illustrations that are your own, the parable of geometry and matter, the reason why the atmosphere is transparent, the power of composition in nature and in man's thought, the uses and uselessness of traveling, the law of compensation, the transcendent excellence of truth and character and rhetoric and things, the sublimity of self-reliance, and the rewards of perseverance in the best opinion? Have you not a testimony to give for Shakespeare, for Milton? One sentence of real praise of Jesus is worth a century of legendary Christianity. Can you not write as though you wrote to yourself, and drop the token assured that a wise hand will pick it up? I recorded worse things in my Italian journal than one I omitted, that a lady in Palermo invited me to come and ride out with her in her barouche, which I did, though the day was rainy, and so the coach was covered. She did not invite me to dine, so I made my obeisance, when on our return I had waited upon her into the house. Then I walked home through a drenching rain in a city where I was an entire stranger, but not until I had paid her coachman my $50 who waylaid me on the stairs. To as fat an understanding as mine, I cannot but think it might have occurred that to send the guest home or to pay one's servants would really be a finer compliment, but it is a good specimen of the misery of finery. Address your reed to the young American, and know that you hook to you all like minds far or near, whether you shall know them or not. And remember Brutus. And then there is a Latin quotation from Cicero. The chapter on optical delusions in our lifetime is very large. How many times have we resolved not to be again deceived by one and the same? Commerce, which vulgarizes great things, will never quite degrade for the poet the miracle of the letter which floats round the globe in a pine ship and comes safe to the eye for which it was writ. Good story Squire Adams told here of countrymen traveling between day and sunrise and seeing the locomotive and its train of cars on the railroad. He saw the smoke and the wheels, his horse was frightened, ran, turned over the wagon and broke it, and he crawled to a house for help. They asked him what had happened. He could not tell what, but that it looked like hell in harness. Trifles move us more than laws. Why am I more curious to know the reason why the star form is so oft repeated in botany, why the number 5 is such a favorite with nature, than to understand the circulation of the sap and the formation of buds? Those two wonders of electromagnetism and the polarization of light have also a peculiar interest. May 16th. Robert Herrick delights in praising Ben Jonson, and has many panegyrical pieces to others, and in one copy of verses praising many, Beaumont and Fletcher and others, yet never drops the name of Shakespeare. 'Tis like the want of the statues of Cassius and Brutus in the funeral of Junia. Then there's an untranslated Latin quotation. Herrick's merit is the simplicity and manliness of his utterance, and only rarely the weight of his sentences. He has, and is conscious of having, a noble idiomatic use of his English, a perfect plain style from which he can at any time soar to a fine lyric delicacy, or descend to the coarsest sarcasm without losing his firm footing. But this power of speech was accompanied by an assurance of fame. A similar merit is that of the American Hill House, though no approach to Herrick's wealth. Landor thinks that a knowledge of poetry is reserved for some purer state of sensation in existence. The observation of a mere observer is more unsuspicious than that of a theorist. I ought to have no shame in publishing the records of one who aimed only at the upright position, more anxious that the thing should be truly seen than careful what thing it was. As we exercise little election in our landscape, but see for the most part what God sets before us, I cannot but think mere enumeration of the objects would be found to be more than a catalogue, would be a symmetrical picture, not designed by us, but by our Maker, as when we first perceive the meaning of a sentence which we have carried in the memory for years. May 24th. Coincidences, dreams, animal magnetism, omens, sacred lots have great interest for some minds. May 29th. In your rhetoric, notice that only once or twice in history can the words dire and tremendous fit. He weakens who means to confirm his speech by vehemence, feminine vehemence. Quote, a tremendous faculty, that of thinking on one's legs, is a newspaper description of eloquence, and this is the tolerable use of the word noticed above. At the Sunday school meeting, G.P.B. remarked that his measure of good speech was the desire it imparted to him to speak and open the suggestions of the man on the floor. Mr. L. spoke, and the eminent propriety of his manner answered to the audience the same purpose as if he had said something. All people agreed it was a good speech. Yet is not nature cheated, for these men accomplish nothing. Their effect is as merely phenomenal as their work. Add to G.P.B.'s remark just now our frequent experience of receiving intellectual activity from an acting mind. I read 2 days since verses of Eliot, the poet, which filled me with desire to write, with faith in the art. Now he will render a service to his countrymen, who in these days will patiently collect the experiences of this kind and so write rules for the discipline of the intellect. Could you show me how in every torpid hour I would wake to full belief and earnest labor? Oh, give me the recipe. Better yet, could you point me to the divine page of Cudworth, Plato, Bacon, Herbert, Carlyle, Michelangelo, or of Paul, or of God and nature, where I could find a timely restoration of my reason under the insanity of passion? Do that, and the joy of a Saviour shall be yours. Happy the wit or dunce, but hard is it to be half a bard. May 30th. The ideal philosophy is much more akin to virtue than to vice. When the mountains begin to look unreal, the soul is in a high state, yet in an action of justice or charity things look solid again. I am convinced that we are very much indebted to each other for stimulus, and for such confirmations to our own thoughts that we venture to try them in practice, a step we should have long postponed but for that seconding. June 1st. In this age of seeming, nothing can be more important than the opening and promulgation of the gospel of compensations to save the land. The men who put manner for matter at our public meetings should learn that they have lost their time. The man who mistakes his profession, the scholar who takes his subject from dictation and not from his heart, should know that he has lost as much as he seems to have gained. And when the vain speaker has sat down and the people say, "What a good speech!" it still takes an ounce to balance an ounce. Societies as well as individuals are bubbles, but nature cannot be cheated. That only profits which is profitable. Life alone can impart life, and though we burst, we can only be valued as we make ourselves valuable. The irresistible conclusion of your chapter on compensation should be, therefore, the devil is an ass. Levi Woodbury occupies the position once filled by Alexander Hamilton. Jackson, that of Washington. Isaac Hill is a member of the Senate as much as Daniel Webster. But does anyone living imagine that this equal nominal standing makes the standing of these men identical? It is perfectly well known both to Washington and to Jackson the gulf that is between them, and likewise to Hamilton and to Woodbury, and likewise to Webster and to Hill. Mr. Alston would build a very plain house and have plain furniture, because he would hold out no bribe to any to visit him who had not similar taste to his own. A good ascetic. Sir Henry Wotton said of Sidney that, quote, his wit was the measure of incongruity. June 4th. It seems as if every sentence should be prefixed with the word true or apparent to indicate the writer's intention of speaking after that which is or that which seems. Thus, truly, our power increases exactly in the measure that we know how to use it, but apparently, Andrew Jackson is more powerful than John Marshall. In heaven, utterance is place enough. Heaven is the name we give to the true state, the world of reason, not of the understanding, of the real, not the apparent. It exists always, whether it is ever to be separated from the hell or not. It is, as Coleridge said, another world, but not to come. The world I describe is that where only the laws of mind are known. The only economy of time is saying and doing nothing untrue to self. Knowledge is hard to get and unsatisfying when gained. Knowledge is a pleasing provocation to the mind beforehand, and not cumbersome afterwards. Am I true to myself? Then nations and ages do guide my pen, then I perceive my commission to be coeval with the oldest causes. June 10th. Aristotle platonizes. Cudworth is like a cow in June which breathes of nothing but clover and scent grass. He has fed so entirely on an ancient bards and sages that all his diction is redolent of their books. He is a stream of Corinthian brass in which gold and silver and iron are molten together out of ancient temples. I endeavor to announce the laws of the first philosophy. It is the mark of these that their enunciation awakens the feeling of the moral sublime, and great men are they who believe in them. Every one of these propositions resembles a great circle in astronomy. No matter in what direction it be drawn, it contains the whole sphere, so each of these seems to imply all truth. Compare a page of Bacon with Swift, Chesterfield, Lacan, and see the difference of great and less circles. These are gleams of a world in which we do not live. They astonish the understanding. June 16th. Books, blessed art and blessed instruments of pen, ink, and paper that hold fast the representatives of the related thoughts. Here logic holds, and between the major and minor of a syllogism cannot the mind whisk away because a thrush flies out of a bush, or a smart golden senecio catches the eye, or an elegant lupine lifts its blue spires in the path. June 20th. The advantage in education is always with those children who slip up into life without being objects of notice. Happy then those who are members of large families. Literature. I asked in the woods what I would know of Homer if the Oedipus were ready to reply. We would know whether in the minds of this age were any radical differences from ours, whether they had an equivalent for our organized morale, whether we have lost by civilization any force, by Christianity any virtue. Machinery encumbers. Homer is to us nothing personal, merely the representative of his time. I believe that to be his sincerest use and worth. The most abstract questions are really operating actively on men, though they know it not, and the real interest, that effervescence in the love of literary gossip, is a wise curiosity in the human soul to know if our fellow is our counterpart. I suppose we would most anxiously know what is his moral sentiment, and not so curiously inquire whether he managed better than we with our fellow beings, the sea and the land, the plants, the animals, fire and light. When we read a book in a foreign language, we suppose that an English version of it would be a transfusion of it into our own consciousness. But take Coleridge or Bacon, or many an English book besides, and you immediately feel that the English is a language also, and that a book writ in that tongue is yet very, very far from you, from being transfused into your own consciousness. There is every degree of remoteness from the line of things in the line of words. By and by comes a word true and closely embracing the thing. That is not Latin, nor English, nor any language, but thought. The aim of the author is not to tell truth, that he cannot do, but to suggest it. He has only approximated it himself, and hence his cumbrous, embarrassed speech. He uses many words, hoping that one, if not another, will bring you as near to the fact as he is. For language itself is young and unformed. In heaven it will be, as Samson Reed said, one with things. Now there are many things that refuse to be recorded, perhaps the larger half. The unsaid part is the best of every discourse. The good of publishing one's thoughts is that of hooking to you like-minded men, and of giving to men whom you value, such as Wordsworth or Landor, 1 hour of stimulated thought. Yet how few! Who in Concord cares for the first philosophy in a book? The woman whose child is to be suckled? The man at 9 Acres Corner who is to cart 60 loads of gravel on his meadow? The stageman? The gunsmith? Oh, no. Who then? June 21st. Poetry preceded prose, as the form of sustained thought, as reason, whose vehicle poetry is, precedes the understanding. When you assume the rhythm of verse and the analogy of nature, it is making proclamation. I am now freed from the trammels of the apparent. I speak from the mind. June 22nd. It is unpleasing to meet with those anomalous wits who say brilliant things and yet have no proportioned strength of mind. Chalmers, Edward, Irving, Brougham, Randolph, or more frequently talkers who impose upon us by the vivacity or weight of single remarks, and when you better know the speaker, quote, you wonder how the devil they got there. The more genius, usually the more conformity there is to the general model, but these seem hybrids. I wrote L. that this speech-making seems to turn the man out of doors, to turn his timber into flowers, and make him like unto Apicius, who sold his house, but kept the balcony to see and be seen in. Aunt saith, the finest wits have their sediment. Some persons in Rhode Island saying to George Fox that if they had money enough, they would hire him to be their minister, he said, then it was time for him to be gone, for if their eye was to him, or to any of them, then would they never come to their own teacher. June 24th. 3 silent revolutions in England. First, when the professions fell from the church. 2, when literature fell from the professions. 3, when the press fell from literature. Coleridge. I remembered to Charles tonight the English gentleman whom I saw in the cold hostelry at Simplon at the top of the mountain, and whose manners so satisfied my eye. He met there unexpectedly an acquaintance, and conversed with him with great ease and affectionateness, and as if totally unconscious of the presence of any other company, yet with high-bred air. The self-existency of the gentleman is his best mark. He is to be a man first, with original perceptions of the true and the beautiful, and thence should grow his grace and dignity. Then he is God's gentleman, and a new argument to the Stoic. Quote, "When I am purified by the light of heaven, my soul will become the mirror of the world, in which I shall discern all abstruse secrets." End quote. Wharton quotes this, he says, from an ancient Turkish poet. History of English Poetry. Books are not writ in the style of conversation. One might say they are not addressed to the same beings as gossip and cheat in the street. Neither are speeches, orations, sermons, academic discourse on the same key of thought, or addressed to the same beings. The man that just now chatted at your side of trifles rises in the assembly to speak, and speaks to them collectively in a tone and with a series of thoughts he would never think of assuming to any of them alone, because man's universal nature is his inmost nature. Idealism is not so much prejudiced by danger as by inconvenience. In our speculative habits, we sometimes expect that the too solid earth will melt. Then we cross the ocean, sweltering, seasick, reeling week after week with tar, harness tub, and bilge, and as an ingenious friend says, it is carrying the joke too far. June 26th. If you would know what nobody knows, read what everybody reads, just 1 year afterwards, and you shall be a fund of new and unheard of speculations. The mystery of humility is treated of by Jesus, by Dante, by Chaucer in his Griselda, by Milton, and by Samson Reed. Or listen to the discourse of a wise man to a crowd in a perfect conviction that nobody hears it but you. June 27th. I wrote to Hedge that good society seemed an optical illusion that ought to be classed with Bacon's Idols of the Cave. Carlyle affirms it has ceased to exist. CCE affirmed that it has just begun. Greek and Roman knew it not. To me it seems that it is so steadily and universally thwarted by death, sickness, removal, unfitness, ceremony, or whatnot, that a design to hinder it must be suspected. Every person is indulged with an opportunity or two of equal and hearty communication, enough to show him his potential heaven. But between cultivated minds, the first interview is the best, and it is surprising in how few hours the result of years are exhausted. Besides, though it seem ungrateful to friends whom the heart knoweth by name, yet the value of the conversation is not measured according to the wisdom of the company, but by quite other and indefinable causes, the fortunate moods. I think we owe the most recreation and most memorable thoughts to very unpromising gossips. I copied the above from memory. June 29th. George Fox's chosen expression for the God manifest in the mind is the seed. He seems that the seed of which the beauty of the world is the flower, and goodness is the fruit. I replied this morning to the committee that I would do what I could to prepare a historical discourse for the town anniversary. Yet why notice it? Centuries pass unnoticed. The Saxon king was told that man's life was like the swallow that flew in at one window, fluttered around, and flew out at another. So is this population of the spot of God's earth called Concord. For a moment they fish in this river, plow furrows in the banks, build houses on the fields, mow the grass, but hold on to hill or tree never so fast. They must disappear in a trice. The contemplation of nature is all that is fine. Who can tell me how many thousand years, every day, the clouds have shaded these fields with their purple awning? The little river by whose banks most of us were born, every winter for ages has spread its crust of ice over the great meadows which in ages it has formed. The countless families that follow or precede man keep no jubilee, mark no era. The fly and the moth in burnished armor, these little immigrants travel fast. They have no baggage wagon, all night they creep. The ant has no provision for sleep. The trees that surround us grew up in the days of Pt.13, the first celebration from that everlasting past. The oaks that were then acorns wave their branches in this morning's wind. The little flower that at this season stars the woods and roadsides with its profuse blooms won the eye of the stern pilgrim with its humble beauty. The maple grew red in the early frost over those houseless men burrowing in the sand. The mighty pine, yet untouched, towered into the frosty air, and yet another kind of permanence has also been permitted. Here are still the names of the first 50 years. Here is Blood, Willard, Flint, Wood, Barrett, Haywood, Hunt, Wheeler, Jones, Buttrick. And if the name of Bulkley is wanting, the honor you have done me this day shows your kindness for his blood. July 1st. A windmill, so soon as it is far enough in the landscape to look like a toy, is picturesque. Nearer it is disagreeable. The robin, like the geranium family, wears sober colors. Charles says that painting the vans red is adding insult to injury. Quote, "There is scarce truth enough alive to make society secure," says Shakespeare in Measure for Measure. In the memory of the disembodied soul, the days or hours of pure reason will shine with a steady light as the life of life, and all the other days and weeks will appear but as hyphens which serve to join these. July 2nd. The distinction of science, objective and subjective, I find in Norris's Ideal World. Admirable passages quoted from St. Augustine's De Libero Arbitrero, Lib. 2, quote, "And yet as rich as thy furniture is, O city of God, thy gates stand always open, free to all comers. For thy immovable wealth needs no guard, the exchequer of light and truth is secure against all thievish attempts, and the treasures of wisdom, though common to all, can yet be rifled or carried away by none." Norris's first volume was an unexpected delight this afternoon. He fights the battles and affirms the facts I had proposed to myself to do. But he falls, I so think, into the common error of the first philosophers, that of attempting to fight for reason with the weapons of the understanding. All this polemics and syllogism and definition is so much waste paper, and Montaigne is almost the only man who has never lost sight of this fact. July 4th. Talked last eve with George Bradford of Locke, who I maintained had given me little. I am much more indebted to persons of far less name. I believe his service was to popularize metaphysics, allure men of the world to its study, if that indeed be of service. George gave a good account of his friend Alcott, who is a consistent spiritualist, and so expects the influence of Christianity into trade, government, and arts. The arts languish now because all their scope is exhibition. When they originated, it was to serve the gods. The Catholic religion has turned them to continual account in its service. Now they are mere flourishes. Is it strange they perish? Poetry, to be sterling, must be more than a show, must have or be an earnest meaning. Chaucer, Wordsworth, per contra Moore, and Byron. I study the art of solitude. I yield me as gracefully as I can to my destiny. Why cannot one get the good of his doom, and since it is from eternity a settled thing that he and society shall be nothing to each other, why need he blush so, and make wry faces, and labor to keep up a poor beginner's place, a freshman's seat in the fine world? One of the good effects of hearing the man of genius is that he shows the world of thought to be infinite again, which you had supposed exhausted. July 15th. Why do I still go to pasture, where I'd ever find grass, to these actors without a purpose, unless a poor mechanical one, these talkers without method and reasoners without an idea. At the divinity school this morning, I heard what was called the best performance, but it was founded on nothing and led to nothing, and I wondered at the patience of the people. This afternoon, the king of the house of Sem spoke, and made as if he was in earnest with pathetic tones and gesture and the most approved expressions, and all about nothing, and he was answered by others with equal apparent earnestness, and still it was all nothing. The building seemed to grudge its rent if the assembly did not their time. Stetson, who jokes, seems the only wise man. It is a pity 300 men should meet to make believe or play debate. They are all so solemn and vehement that I listen with all my ears, and for my life can't find any idea at the foundation of their zeal. I forgive desultoriness, trifling vice even, in a young man, so long as I believe that he has a closet of secret thoughts to which he retires to his home, and which have a sort of parent's interest in him wherever he is. At sight of them he bows. But if he is not in earnest about anything, if all his interest is good breeding and imitation, I had as lief not to be as be him. Great Putter makes my philanthropic friends about the children. I should be glad to be convinced that they have taught one child one thing. G and B no doubt teach them just as much as the minister did before, not a jot more, for the children don't understand anything they say. This next passage is labeled quotation. Coleridge loses by De Quincey, but more by his own concealing, uncandid acknowledgment of debt to Schelling. Why could not he have said generously, like Goethe, I owe all? As soon as one gets so far above pride as to say all truth that might come from him, and that now does come from him, as truth and not as his truth, as soon as he acknowledges that all is suggestion, then he may be indebted without shame to all. I see that the young men like to speak at public meetings, just as they would take exhilarating gas, 'tis so pretty an intoxication. Oh, for the days of the Locrian halters again. The wit of man is more elastic than the air our bodies breathe. A whole nation will subsist for centuries on one thought, and then every individual man will be oppressed by the rush of his conceptions, and always a plenum with 1 grain or 60 atmospheres. Let not the voluptuary dare to judge of literary, far less of philosophical questions. Let him wait until the blindness that belongs to pollution has passed from his eyes. We all have an instinct that a good man, good and wise, shall be to say intuitively, i.e., from God, what is true and great and beautiful. Never numbers, but the simple and wise shall judge. Not the Wartons and Drakes, but some divine savage like Webster, Wordsworth, and Reed, whom neither the town or the college ever made, shall say that we shall all believe. How we thirst for a natural thinker! I find good things in this manuscript of Ogner, and I am taken with the design of his work. But it seems as if everybody was insane on one side, and the Bible makes them as crazy as Bentham or Spurzheim or politics. The ethical doctrines of these theosophists are true and exalting, but straightway they run upon their divine transformation, the death of God, etc., and become horn mad. To that point they speak reason, then they begin to babble, and so this man cries out, Woe to them that do not believe, etc., etc. This obstinate Orientalism, that God is a petty Asiatic king, and will be very angry if you do not prostrate yourself, they cannot get rid of. But now and then outbreaks the sublimity of truth. Quote, We shall pass to the future existence as we enter into an agreeable dream. All nature will accompany us there. End quote. Much that is best is hid by being next to us. Who in Christendom knows the beauty and grandeur of the Lord's Prayer? July 24th. Quote, In the first age of the world, by reason of the number of their days, their memory served instead of books. End quote. Hooker. There is no book like a memory, and none that hath such a perfect index, and that of every kind, alphabetical, systematic, and arranged by names of persons and all manners of associations. Quote, I say three persons, ingeniously confessed St. Augustine on the Trinity. Quote, not that I may say something, but that I may not say nothing. End quote. Most persons exist to us merely or chiefly in relations of time and space. Those whom we love, whom we venerate, or whom we serve exist to us independently of the relations. O thou who drawest good out of fury of devils, save me. Yesterday I visited Jonas Buttrick and Abel Davis, the former aged 70, the latter 79 years. Both were present at Concord fight. Davis was one of the militia under command of blank. Jonas Buttrick remembers Major Hosmer and Captain Davis going back and forward often, and said of Captain Davis that, quote, his face was red as a piece of broadcloth, red as a beet. He looked very much worried, end quote. I asked, worried with fear? No. Both agree that Captain Davis had the right of the companies, but know not why. Jonas Buttrick thinks that he did not come up from Acton until after the consultation of the officers and the conclusion to fight, and that he took the right because that was the side on which he most conveniently joined the troops. Abel Davis thinks that Major Buttrick, having given up his company to blank, Captain Davis had the right in virtue of his rank. Dr. Palfrey remarked at Cambridge, when we talked of the manners of Wordsworth and Coleridge, that there seemed to be no such thing as a conventional manner among the eminent men of England, for these people lived in the best society, yet each indulged the strongest individual peculiarities. For literature, one is ever struck with the fact that the good once is good always. The average strength is so fixed that among 30 jumpers the longest jump will be likely to be the longest of 300, and a very long jump will remain a very long jump a century afterward. Richard Hooker wrote good prose in 1580. Here it is good prose in 1835. There have not been 40 persons of his nation from that time to this who could write better. The Quarterly Review toils to prove that there is no selfish aristocracy in America, but that every man shakes hands heartily with every other man, and the Chancellor says, my brother, the grocer, and to fix this fact will be to stamp us with desired infamy. I earnestly wish it could be proved. I wish it could be shown that no distinctions created by contemptible pride existed here, and none but the natural ones of talent and virtue, but I fear we do not deserve the praise of this reviewer's ill opinion. The only ambition which truth allows is to be the servant of all. The last shall be first. I read with great delight the Record of a School. It aims all the time to show the symbolical character of all things to the children, and it is alleged, and I doubt not truly, that the children take the thought with delight. It is remarkable that all poets, orators, and philosophers have been those who could most sharply see and most happily present emblems, parables, figures. Good writing and brilliant conversation are perpetual allegories. My fortunes are in the mold, says Philip Van Artevelde. Webster is such a poet in every speech. You cannot keep out of politics more than you can keep out of frost, he said to Clifford. No matter for the baggage so long as the troop is safe, he said when he lost his trunk. Waves lash the shore, etc., Indian's whole speech. Back of the hand was Crockett's expression. All the memorable words of the world are these figurative expressions. Light and heat have passed into all speech for knowledge and love. The river is nothing but as it typifies the flux of time. Many of these signs seem very arbitrary and historical. I should gladly know what gave such universal acceptance to Cupid's arrow for the passion of love, and more meanly the horn of the shame of cuckoldom. Ephraim Stowe says the newspaper was born on the last day of the year, which gave occasion to a parish wit to remark that he came near to not being born at all. That is the end of part 2 of Emerson's journal collection number 26. In the next video, we will conclude with part 3. Thank you for listening.